At Christmas dinner, my father-in-law set down his glass, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "Let's be honest. The business goes to Ryan, your staff with a ring on your finger. If that doesn't sit right with you, the door's right there." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't hesitate. He said it the way you'd read a line from a lease agreement, clean, final, and already signed. My mother-in-law smoothed the tablecloth. My husband said nothing. And in that moment, sitting under the chandelier my hands had paid to repair, I understood exactly what I was to this family. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me something first. Where are you listening from? And if someone said those words to you at your own dinner table, what would you have done? My name is Claire, and for 5 years I was the most useful person in a family that never once considered me one of their own. I married Ryan at 26, young enough to believe that love was the same thing as belonging. His family owned a mid-size commercial landscaping company outside of Columbus, Ohio. Nothing flashy, but solid. Contracts with corporate parks, municipal properties, a handful of university campuses. My father-in-law had built it over 30 years and wore that fact like a crown he never took off. I was an accountant. Not by accident, not as a fallback, but because numbers made sense to me in a way people sometimes didn't. I could look at a balance sheet, the way other people read a room, instantly knowing where the pressure was, what was being hidden, what was about to give. When I married into the family, I offered to help part-time, just to get familiar. That part-time became full-time within 4 months. No contract, no title change, no salary adjustment. Just more work quietly absorbed into my life because I was there, I was capable, and no one else wanted to do it. My brother-in-law Ryan spent most of his days driving between job sites, shaking hands, and calling it management. He was charming the way furniture showrooms are charming, all surface and arrangement, nothing built to last. He had the family name and the easy smile, and the ability to make my father-in-law laugh at exactly the right moment. I had spreadsheets, vendor contracts, and the kind of institutional knowledge that only comes from showing up every single day. I remember the first Christmas after we married. My mother-in-law handed out gifts and handed Ryan a leather planner embossed with his initials and the company logo. She handed me a candle, vanilla-scented. I thanked her and smiled, and later that night, sitting in the car in the driveway, I told myself it was just one Christmas. It wasn't just one Christmas. For 5 years, I filed quarterly taxes, renegotiated supplier rates that saved the company over $60,000, caught a billing error that would have cost them a contract with the city, and built the payroll system from scratch after the previous one collapsed. Ryan would present updates at family dinners and say, "We did this, and we figured that out, and no one ever asked what we meant." I knew the word meant me. My father-in-law called me efficient. My mother-in-law called me helpful. Ryan called me babe. No one called me an equal. I told myself it was building towards something. That loyalty compounded. That one day the work would speak for itself. I kept that belief the way you keep a photograph in a drawer, not displayed but present, something to return to when the room felt too small. The Christmas dinner where everything broke open was the year my father-in-law decided to make the succession announcement official. He'd been hinting at it for months. Little comments dropped over Sunday dinners like stones into still water. I didn't think much of it. I assumed the transition would be gradual, that roles would be defined, that the conversation would include me given that I was, at that point, functionally running the financial backbone of the company. The table was set beautifully that night. Pine centerpieces, white candles, the good china that only came out twice a year. My mother-in-law had spent 2 days cooking. I had spent the previous week closing out year-end books and preparing the Q4 summary for the family meeting scheduled in January. I came to that dinner tired but present, a glass of wine in hand, sitting next to my husband across from his parents, thinking, for just a moment, that it looked like something real. My father-in-law tapped his glass once. The table went quiet. He talked for a while about the company, about sacrifice, about legacy. It was the kind of speech that sounds like it's about everyone but is actually about one person. He looked at Ryan the entire time. Then he turned to me, as if suddenly remembering I existed, and that's when he said it, flat, almost bored. "Let's be honest. The business goes to Ryan, your staff with a ring on your finger. If that doesn't sit right with you, the door's right there." Ryan reached over and touched my wrist. Not in comfort, in warning, a small squeeze that meant don't. My mother-in-law looked at her plate. My father-in-law picked up his fork. I sat there for 3 full seconds, long enough to feel the room clearly, long enough to understand that the warning in my husband's touch was not about protecting me. It was about protecting the moment. Long enough to understand that no one at this table was surprised by what had just been said. They had all known this was coming. I was the only one who hadn't been told. The calm that moved through me was not peace. It was the specific stillness that comes when something you suspected is finally confirmed. Not a wound, a diagnosis. I set my wine glass down carefully. I folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate. I looked at my father-in-law the way you look at a problem you've finally decided to stop solving. "All right," I said, "then I'll stop." Nobody laughed. Nobody spoke. I pushed my chair back, stood, and walked to the coat hook near the back door. I heard Ryan say my name, low and controlled, the voice he used when he was managing a situation. I took my coat. I walked out into the December cold without looking back. The drive home was 20 minutes. I remember every one of them. The radio was off. The streets were quiet in the way that only happens on Christmas Eve, empty and unhurried. The whole world paused somewhere warm. I drove with both hands on the wheel and a clarity in my chest I hadn't felt in years. When I got home, I didn't call anyone. I didn't cry. I went to my home office, sat down at my desk, and opened the filing cabinet I kept locked. Not because I'd planned this moment, but because I was an accountant, and accountants keep records of everything. I had been meticulous. 5 years of pay stubs from the company that consistently underpaid me relative to market rate. 5 years of expense reports with my signature approving costs that benefited Ryan's department. Contracts I had drafted, saved under my login, time-stamped. And at the very back of the folder, something I had discovered 14 months ago and told myself I would deal with later. A business loan, $320,000, taken out 2.5 years earlier, signed in my name. I had found it while auditing a discrepancy in the company's long-term liability column. The loan itself wasn't unusual. The company took loans. What was unusual was the name on the personal guarantee. Mine. Not my father-in-law's, not Ryan's. Mine. My signature, my social security number, my personal credit on the line for a debt the company had used to fund Ryan's expansion of the Western Territory, a territory that had underperformed for 18 months and quietly rolled its losses into the operating budget. At the time I found it, I had convinced myself there was an explanation. That my father-in-law had perhaps meant to discuss it with me and hadn't gotten around to it. That Ryan would explain when I brought it up. I brought it up once, carefully, framing it as a question about liability structure. Ryan said his father handled the financing. My father-in-law changed the subject. I let it sit. I kept working. That night, sitting alone in my home office with the document in my hands, I stopped letting it sit. I didn't sleep. I worked. By 3 in the morning, I had compiled everything into a single organized folder. By 5, I had sent a preliminary email to a financial attorney I found through my professional network, someone with no connection to the family. I kept the email short, factual, and attached 3 documents. I asked for a consultation as soon as possible. Ryan came home just after midnight. I heard him move through the house, heard him stop outside the office door. He knocked twice, a soft knock, the knock of a man who knows he is not in a position to demand entry. "Claire, I know what you want to say," I told him through the door. "Not tonight." He stood there for a moment. Then I heard him walk away. The attorney responded the next morning. I met with her the day after Christmas, sitting in a clean office that smelled like coffee and quiet competence. She reviewed what I brought in 40 minutes and looked up at me over the documents with an expression that was professional but unmistakable. This, she said, was potentially fraudulent use of an individual's credit without documented consent. She asked if I had ever signed a personal guarantee for this loan intentionally. I had not. She asked if my signature could have been replicated by someone with access to my documents. My father-in-law had managed all company-level banking for 30 years. He had access to everything. She told me my options. I told her which one I wanted to pursue. We scheduled a follow-up for January 3rd. In the days between Christmas and the New Year, Ryan tried several times to have a conversation. He cycled through versions of the same argument. His father was under stress, succession planning was complicated, the dinner had gotten out of hand, Could I please just come to the January meeting and we could work it out together as a family? The word family landed differently now. It had the hollow sound of a word used too often for things it didn't actually describe. I wasn't cold to him. I wasn't dramatic. I told him simply that I was taking some time to review my professional and personal situation, and that I would let him know when I was ready to talk. He didn't know about the attorney. He didn't know about the loan documents. He thought this was about hurt feelings from a careless dinner comment. He thought I needed to cool off. He had no idea I had spent the last week building a case. The January meeting was held at the company's main office on a Wednesday morning. Conference room, long table, my father-in-law at the head, my mother-in-law there for moral support, Ryan to my left, the company's general manager sitting quietly near the window. My father-in-law had prepared slides. He presented them with the confidence of a man who had run this room for 30 years and had no reason to expect anything different today. He talked about the transition plan, Ryan as CEO, effective April, the phased reduction of certain operational roles. He used the word redundancy once and didn't look at me when he said it. When he finished and asked for questions, I opened the folder I'd brought and slid a single document to the center of the table. Before we move forward, I said, I'd like to discuss this. My father-in-law looked at the document. His expression didn't change immediately. It took a second, the way it takes a second for cold water to register. Then, something shifted behind his eyes. That's a standard liability structure, he said. It has my name on the personal guarantee, I said, without my knowledge or consent. You were part of the company. These things... I was never a partner. I was never a co-owner. I had no equity stake. I kept my voice even. This signature was not authorized by me. My attorney agrees. The general manager near the window had gone very still. My mother-in-law's hand moved to her husband's arm. Ryan was staring at the table. Amanda, my father-in-law started, and then stopped, because he'd used the wrong name. He meant Claire. He looked at me and I watched him recalibrate. Claire, this can be resolved internally. There's no need to involve... I've already involved, I said. I have a meeting with the bank's compliance officer on Friday. My attorney has filed a preliminary review with the state. I'm not here to negotiate the outcome. I'm here to let you know where things stand. The room had the specific quiet of people understanding, all at once, that the ground has moved. You would do this to family? My mother-in-law asked. She wasn't angry. She sounded genuinely confused. You told me at Christmas that I was staff, I said, looking at my father-in-law. Staff doesn't absorb personal liability for $320,000 on behalf of a company she doesn't own? I paused. So which is it? Because it can't be both. No one answered. I'll be resigning my position effective today, I said. My attorney will be in contact with yours. Any company access I have will be revoked by end of day. I closed the folder. I hope the transition to Ryan goes smoothly. He'll need to find someone to run the books. I stood. Ryan reached out and grabbed my arm, not rough, but urgent. Claire, please, just give us a chance to fix this. I looked at his hand on my arm. He let go. You had 5 years, I said. It wasn't cruel. It was just the count. I picked up my bag and walked through the office, past the front desk where I had spent more mornings than I could number, past the framed company photos on the wall that didn't include me in a single one, and out through the glass front doors into the January cold. I sat in my car for a long moment, not because I needed to collect myself, but because I wanted to feel it, the specific weight of a chapter ending. The cold came through the glass in a slow press and the parking lot was gray and ordinary and I was fine. I was more than fine. I felt like someone who had just put down something heavy and was finally noticing how long their arms had been aching. I drove home and made coffee and called my sister, who I hadn't spoken to honestly in months, because I had been too deep inside that house to have a clear conversation with anyone outside it. I told her everything. She was quiet for a long time, and then she said, I always hated that company dinner you described. I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in longer than I could track. The weeks that followed were complicated in the way that legal and financial untangling is always complicated, full of paperwork and phone calls and the particular fatigue of undoing things that were knotted on purpose. The bank's compliance review took 6 weeks. My attorney was methodical and thorough. My father-in-law hired representation within days of the meeting, which told me everything I needed to know about where his conscience sat. In the end, the personal guarantee was voided based on lack of documented consent and irregularities in the authorization chain. The company was required to restructure the liability under its own name. I was removed cleanly. The legal fees came out of the negotiated settlement, which also covered back compensation calculated against market rate for my actual role over 5 years. The number was not symbolic, it was significant. Ryan and I separated in February, not with screaming or destruction, but with the slow, careful honesty of two people acknowledging what had been true for longer than either wanted to admit. He had known about the loan, not the forgery maybe, but the guarantee. He had known and said nothing because it was easier to let me carry it than to confront his father. I understood that about him now. I didn't hate him for it, I just couldn't stay. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood I had always liked but never lived in, close to good coffee and a weekend farmer's market, and far enough from the family's geography that I didn't run into anyone unexpectedly. I kept my plants on the windowsills. I kept my files organized. I started sleeping 8 hours a night, which sounds like a small thing but felt enormous, like recovering a room in my own house I'd been renting out without realizing it. 3 months after the January meeting, I took on my first independent client, a small architectural firm that needed someone to overhaul their billing process. Then a restaurant group, then a nonprofit running on financial chaos and good intentions. Word moved quietly through professional circles the way it does when someone is actually competent without drama attached to it. By summer, I had more clients than I had expected and was turning away the ones that didn't feel right. I built something that had my name on it, not as a personal guarantee that someone else signed. My name, chosen, placed deliberately on work I owned. Some mornings I sit at my desk before the city gets loud, and I look at the spreadsheet I built from scratch for one of my clients. Clean columns, honest numbers, nothing hidden in the margins, and I feel the particular satisfaction of a life that adds up correctly. No missing entries, no liabilities I didn't agree to carry. I think about that Christmas dinner sometimes, not with bitterness, or not only with bitterness, but with a strange gratitude for the clarity of it. My father-in-law did me a favor when he said what he said out loud. For 5 years I had been translating silence into hope, reading generosity into what was actually just efficient use of a resource. That night he stopped letting me do that. He handed me the truth the way you hand someone a bill, impatiently, expecting them to just pay it and move on. I didn't pay it. I built a different account entirely. My father-in-law is still running the company, older now, leaning more heavily on Ryan, who from what I understand is finding the actual work of it harder than he expected. My mother-in-law sends a card at Christmas that I don't respond to. Not out of malice. I just have nothing left to say in that direction. What I have is here, in the work and the quiet and the clean lines of a life I assembled myself. No crown over my head, no one else's name on my labor. Just the steady arithmetic of a person who finally decided that belonging to herself was the only inheritance worth building toward. I don't need their door anymore. I built my own. If any part of this story sounds like yours, you already know what I'm talking about. Leave a comment and tell me, and if you're still in the middle of it, just remember that the people who hand you that door have no idea what you'll build once you're on the other side of it. Subscribe so you're here when I tell you what came next.